Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of the Vampire Diaries, Grimm, Sleepy Hollow, as well as Emerald City. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you don't want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time when I talk about each of the respective shows I'm talking about. So, for example, if you want to hear what I have to say about this week's episode of Vampire Diaries, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Grimm, Sleepy Hollow, and or Emerald City. But the first thing we're going to talk about is this week's episode of The Vampire Diaries. A lot of stuff went down in this episode that we got to cover. For one, we found out the person who kidnapped Stefan last episode, turns out it was Dorian, because a big thing that ended up getting revealed this episode is now that Stefan's a human again, all his compulsions disappear, which is kind of like, magic, because vampirism is magic. So, just like when magic disappears, just like kind of going back to the whole situation with the travelers. Is that what they were called? When they created that magical siphoning wall around Mystic Falls. At the moment you cross over, all magic would disappear from someone, for example, a vampire. So, it still falls under the category of magic, I guess. So I'm guessing, once vampirism was removed from him, it kind of got rid of all the magic associated with it, including compulsion, which is kind of where Caroline's story took place, but I'll get to that in a second. But Dorian, turns out that basically Stefan killed Dorian's family 7 years ago. And the way Stefan talks about it, it's around the time Klaus was in town. I think it was roughly around the same time Klaus was trying to make hybrids, if I remember correctly. So this is season 2. At the very least, season 2, at most season 3 or whatever. But it was when Klaus was he used to hang out with Stefan way back in the day. He was oh, I want the Ripper back on my side. So it's turn your humanity off. So around that time, one of the people he killed was Dorian. But Dorian had forgotten about it because Stefan compelled him back then. But like everyone else in town that Stefan's ever compelled, it ended up, being blocked. And now Dorian's out for revenge, which Stefan's saying stuff oh, I don't want you. Obviously, Stefan is, it's self-preservation because he doesn't want to die. But at the same time, it's he doesn't want Dorian to face the same punishment as him. Because, Dorian brought up a lot of valid points. It's the dead are dead. There's no changing that. There's no fixing that. It's there's basically, because a lot of this season has always been, the big theme behind this season is redemption. Is there any way of going back? And for Stefan, especially now that he's human, he has a limited amount of time to make up for hundreds of years of damage he's caused, Because this episode, I'll kind of tie it in with the whole Caroline situation. We found out, it's not even just, there were situations where Stefan, did something necessarily bad to one person. It's the after effects of him compelling someone. For example, one dude got fired from his job. He lost his pension and everything because Stefan compelled him and got someone out of the way. And then they're oh, he was responsible. That police guard was responsible. So he lost everything. So it's there's a ripple effect that even though Stefan didn't personally interfere with these people's lives, he kind of did. It put things in perspective. Not even just, it put things in a lot perspective for Caroline, because there's the whole conversation with Matt last episode. Matt being she's part of the problem. That the fact is that all vampires kind of represent the dark side of Mystic Falls. I think I brought it up, when I've been talking about the season so far, but it's something it's gotten heavily put in perspective. It's out of any supernatural, whether it's witches or werewolves, vampires cause the most destruction just because of the way they operate. The fact is that they drink human blood, they leave bodies behind. The fact is they can do what they can do. No other supernatural creature is as destructive as they are. The others have the potential to be, but it never really sunk in until this season, because it's obviously, like I brought up earlier, it's all about redemption. So it means revisiting a lot of older things that you did. But Caroline has to deal with that, and she's okay, Matt, I get it. There's all these messed up things Stefan did, and it's this is all I can do to fix it. It's the only thing I can do to hold on, because it's because this is all from what just Stefan's done, because you also have to think about all the people Caroline's ever, compelled, and it's oh, what ramifications have spawned from them, or people Elena's done it too. That's something that's never come up too, because let's not forget Elena was a vampire at one point in time. There's probably people out there that she compelled. She got turned back into a human too. People Damon has done. There's just a long list of people that it's when you put things in perspective like that, it's incredible. It blows your mind when you think about it, because you never really think about the aftermath of someone being compelled, that because there's a chunk of their lives and it's like they're told to do this and that, but it doesn't make up for the fact is that they were told to ignore certain things. Like obviously some situations it wasn't that bad, but there was a few situations brought up. It kind of puts Matt's hate for vampires, like it adds more weight. I mean, it adds more validity to that hate. But getting back to it, Dorian is just kind of, I mean, he has the right to be upset. He lost his family, and for the longest time, he thought it was an accident. And now he's remembering that it wasn't an accident, that they were murdered. The fact is, it's like, for him, it's not fair. It's like the fact of the matter is, my family's going, but you got to be here. It's like, it's like, everyone, poor Stefan, the man who burdens himself by like beating himself up for all the bad stuff he's done. It's like the fact is you get to live on while everyone else is dead. Like you leave nothing but bodies in your wake. Like once I say, kind of reflecting a lot of what Matt has said. So I'm sure Matt kind of sees a lot of himself when he looked at Dorian, especially when in the aftermath of the whole situation. But like I say, it's a combination of self-preservation, but also because it's like, he didn't want Dorian and kind of like doesn't want to turn him into a murderer. Dorian still pulled the trigger. Granted, it didn't hit anywhere vital. But at first Stefan's like, go ahead and just let me die, because the fact is he believes that's what he deserves. He wants to say he doesn't know, but it's like he definitely believes that. He thinks he deserves to die because it's like, because now that he's no longer a vampire, he won't be able to live on. Like there's a lot of people that have died in a wake because of him, his brother, just all vampires in general. And it's like, especially in his own case being a ripper, he's caused a lot more death and destruction. Yes, Damon's caused some, but like probably not nearly, he hasn't left a bloody path. Okay, granted, Damon has left a bloody path through history, but not as deep and not as red as Stefan has. So it's just it's a situation where it's like, you get it, but that's you feel sorry for Stefan. It's because like Stefan, the entire like vampire crew, whether it's Stefan or Damon, it's like because we've come to know them, it's like, yeah, they're very flawed people, but it's like that's anyone. People make mistakes, but then it's like, well, no one makes mistakes like a vampire, like because a vampire's mistakes could ends with people being dead, but it's still when you have eternity, it's like it doesn't seem like it's much of a punishment. It's like, oh, you get to live the rest of your life, and you're up here trying to like, oh, boo hoo hoo, like you really care. It's like, no, that's something that Stefan's always done. He's always carried his victims. But Dorian did bring up something. It's like, oh, the fact is, am I not a victim? But you didn't remember my name. Is it just because you didn't kill me? But just because you didn't kill me doesn't mean I'm not a victim in all of this, because I lost a lot of my family, so people I cared about. But Dorian did change his mind because it sank in when he saw Stefan. He's seeing Stefan bleeding. It's like it put in perspective, like, oh, I killed someone. It's like he wanted it in that moment, but when it was all said and done, it's like he didn't want that. He didn't want to be the cause for killing someone. It's like even if Stefan deserved it and everything, it still doesn't change the fact is that, because I think he also brought it up that, oh, Stefan is this light, because Stefan is apologetic. It's like, but that's what makes it worse, because Stefan does care. He does feel bad about it, but it's like feeling bad, it isn't enough. Like the fact is my family is gone. You can't bring them back. And it's like, you can't do anything about it. He thought hurting Stefan would fill that void, but it doesn't. It actually just makes him feel bad, because it's like, I could have killed someone. But Matt talks to him because it's like that the fact is that you feel bad about it is a good thing. That means it just shows that you're a good person, that you have a conscience. So don't let it be like a bad thing. Don't think it's a bad thing that you feel bad. It's a good thing, because that means you are a good person. Because basically what it happens is that Matt ends up giving him files. I don't know whether I think it's more so it was Stefan's choice to do this, but it's basically like, here are all these files that are connecting Stefan to a lot of cases over the past couple of decades. You can decide whether to use this and say like, oh, Stefan deserves to be in jail. You won't have to kill him, but at the very least he deserves to be in jail. Which, with all that evidence against him, he'd most likely get the needle or something like that, which is what Dorian kind of brought up earlier. It's like, oh, the death penalty is for what would happen for someone who's killed a lot of people, the number of people you have. So, or he could be like, but he's also like, Dorian, you could just move past this, like let go of your hate. Like, I'm not saying you forget it, but you find a way to move on and try to build a better future. Like, kind of what he's doing with Damon a little bit, like slowly forgiving him. So it's like, Matt knows more so than anyone what kind of position he is in. So it does seem like maybe this is a situation where it is putting things in a little bit more perspective. Maybe maybe he'll ease up off a little bit of Caroline. Like I said, we understand why he is the way he is, the way he feels, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see what Dorian does decide in the end. But Caroline and Stefan aren't in a good place either, because it's like Stefan wants to kind of like, he doesn't know what he's going to do. He doesn't know who he is, because he's been this person for so long. He's been Stefan the vampire. I mean, it's been a very long time since he's been a human, and he doesn't know who he is outside of that vampire. It's like he lives with the guilt that all the bad things he did as a vampire, as a human. And it's like, because Kate had come to him when he was like halfway dying. It's like, the fact is, you might as well give up, you know? It's easier. And he's like, I'm not saying it's easy for you, because you're going to hell nevertheless. Well, who would be easier on is Caroline, because you're going to hell, but that doesn't mean she has to. Because basically, if he's with Caroline, Caroline will spend the next couple decades helping him try to find some sense of redemption. But he's like, the fact of the matter is, that's an unattainable goal. You will never reach that. So why waste her time that she could go off trying to find her own happiness? Don't drag her down with you. Which even then, Stefan, because he loves her, and because he's like, I can't give up fighting. And I'm very stubborn for it, I'm sure. But Kate was like, well, you're only human, because that's just kind of human nature. I mean, obviously some humans accept death a little bit better, but at the same time, it's like, when death, it will approach soon enough, especially when you've lived your entire life as an immortal, and now you're finding out, like, oh, you can definitely, I mean, even as an immortal, there were different ways he could obviously die, but now it's like a sure, clear-cut way, like, oh, he can die at any moment in any shape or form. So his life is 100% finite, because there's no fixing him with anything, because once again, vampire blood won't work on him. So there's also no way of going back to being a vampire either. So because that also brings up the question, what's going to happen with him and Damon? Not unless Damon somehow ends up turning into, not unless they find magically find a cure for all vampirism, which I doubt they will. Which does bring up the question, Bonnie was looking at that necklace, which started crossing my mind. I was like, what if Bonnie ended up somehow, when it's all said and done, if they are able to bring Elena back, which maybe we'll be able to, maybe they won't. But if it was the case, what if Bonnie took that and just became a vampire? Especially considering her circumstances now, but I'll kind of get into that in a little bit. But it's like, Stefan, it's like, I have to leave Mystic Falls because I have to figure out this whole situation, which Caroline's like, stop trying to be a martyr. Like, what you do is you push people away. You think you have to handle this all on your own, your way of punishing yourself. But it's like, the fact is, we had a future together. And it's like, honestly, I don't know what kind of future we could have. I didn't know then, and I don't know now. And it's just, it's sad that it's falling apart like that, because it's like, because it's what Cade said put things in perspective for Stefan. He doesn't want to drag her down with him. He just can't find the words to say, because she obviously, as we already seen, she went through a lot to fix mistakes already presented in front of her with all the people that his compulsion wore off on. So now it's like, he's already seen, in one day he's already seen that she's doing so much for him, and she's done so much for him in the past, and it's like, he can't imagine having her do that for the rest of his life and be a, as Kate put it, a quote-unquote burden. So other things came up, like, for example, we ended up finding out Alaric's girls are developing psychic powers obviously they had powers already because they had siphoning powers and stuff like that. It comes up later on when one of the girls touches Caroline and starts siphoning her power, and the other one gets mad at her and is like about to cast something, and they're like, no, stop, you would hurt one another. And it's like, it seems like their powers are developing. I can only assume it's because of the presence of Cade. Like, he kind of taps into it, like his presence, it seems like it's affecting everyone much like him, Bonnie included. I mean, Bonnie's kind of her own case, which once again, I'll kind of get to that in a second. So I am very curious to see what that might be. Not unless it's because of what Celine did, because Celine set them on that path, and now, it's been bubbling beneath the surface this entire time, and Alaric just didn't realize it. Or maybe he did realize it, and I don't know. Whatever the case may be, or maybe, like I said, it is Cade's presence that is changing that. Maybe him being a psychic, he's kind of tapping into all the other psychics. But kind of talking about the Cade thing real quickly is going back with the Kai situation. I thought Kai got here because of what Bonnie did. No, Kai came here at the same time Cade did. Like the 12 bells ringing, he just snuck his way here. And the conversation comes up of Elena. I figured it would be. I figured it was going to be Damon who kind of came up with it, but it's Kai being like, hey, I'll help you get Elena back if you just, because basically in the state he's in, Kai's halfway in and halfway out, because he can't feel anything, he can't taste anything, because basically he's not technically alive, because he's kind of he's kind of trapped in a world between kind of situation. and he wants Damon's help. And if Damon can help him escape hell completely, he'll help Damon get Elena back. Which everyone was kind of warning him, was like, do not trust Kai, especially Alaric, which Alaric has plenty of reason to hate him. It's like, he tried to kill my children, he killed my wife, and then even Kai was like, oh, don't. I mean, I remember that specifically. She was your fiance, not your wife, which is just adding more insult to injury. Which is like, it's because the thing is, I see Kai a little bit differently. Because obviously Kai was like a sociopath beforehand, but he kind of had a goofy bit of a personality. I feel like it shines even more in this. But I think that's mainly because I've seen, obviously, that actor is Mon-El on Supergirl, so I'm thinking I'm seeing that a little bit, which is kind of hard because it's like, oh, he's a nice dude on Supergirl, and it's like, oh, you look at him as Kai and just being very despicable. Because basically he's kind of got in his mind that, hey, I can stay here longer if I do what the Sirens did, essentially. You know, the fact is that they killed a lot of people. That's kind of what, you know, they killed bad people, and that kind of, like, sated, you know, Cade to let them kind of keep their immortality and stuff like that as part of their deal. So I'm thinking he was thinking if he did the same thing, maybe he could fix it. But for Damon, it's like, no. You don't have to worry about doing that. The best way for redemption, the best way to get from out of being in hell is the redemption. Do like an immaculate act of kindness that will basically balance out the scales and essentially send you to the better afterlife rather than the terrible afterlife. Which Kai does what you would expect Kai to do. He ends up betraying Damon to the point that he siphons magic out of Damon and also takes. It looked like he had a dagger in his hand. I'm not sure if that's the dagger that happened with Kay, because basically he's like, if I'm gonna go down, I'm gonna go down from boom. So it looked like he had a dagger in his hand. So I don't know whether that's the dagger, the relic they got last episode that they plan on using against Cade. Maybe that's what that is. I mean, I think not unless Alaric still has it. I don't know. I might have watched that. Maybe I thought it was the blade and maybe it wasn't. It'd mean a lot if he did have the blade, because maybe this is him supercharging himself to go try and take down Cade, and he's taking Elena as insurance, just so that Damon won't try and get in his way or try and kill him. Because, you know, Kai's like, I've accepted, I'm a bad guy, there is no redemption for me, there's no going back, so might as well go full throttle and, like he said, go off with a bang. So we'll see what Kai does next episode. Well, it's just going to be trying to live up as little bit of his halfway life that he has left before Cade tracks him down, or ends up, you know, trying to attack himself, which I doubt he will have enough magic. Like I said, it comes down to, like, how will you take down the devil? Like, how do you do that? And when he is taken care of, what would that mean for everyone trapped in Cade's world? Which, moving over to Bonnie's side of things, I mean, Bonnie sat down and had a talk with Cade, which obviously she was upset when Damon called her about the whole Kai situation. She's like, you know, she started piecing together. She's like, I got this gut feeling, because basically her psychic powers are kind of kicking in, so she can kind of read it and feel it. It's like, Kai's back, isn't he? It's like, you know, because it's all for the sake of getting Elena back. You know, because the sad thing is, when you try to aim to get everything, you end up like, when you try to get everything you've ever wanted, you'll end up walking away with nothing sometimes, because it becomes too much trying to get everything and you just end up losing it all, you know. So I hope that doesn't turn out to be that case for Damon, but in this moment, it kind of feels like it might be like that, because it's like, oh, you know, it's like, oh, should have let Alaric kill Kai because he can't be trusted. It's like, it's a situation where it's like Damon's holding on to any last bit of hope he has, because if not, he has to spend the rest of his life waiting for Bonnie to die, which has always been the conflicting thing, because Bonnie's his best friend. He wants her to be there at the same time as having his girl. Like I said, once again, bringing it back, he wants everything. He wants redemption. He wants to be able to be with his girl. He doesn't want to have to worry about hell, you know. I'm sure Damon's still stressing about it, but it seems like it's more of an apparent thing for Stefan than it is Damon, because Damon's still a vampire. So, I mean, he could die, you know, under different circumstances, which I'm still not 100% sure if that whole situation is whether he's still quote unquote immortal or not, because the deal is off now that Stefan is here. So that must mean he's definitely no longer immortal. So he can die now. But for, like I brought up earlier, Stefan could die at any moment from anything. You know, there's a few things that can kill Damon. I mean, Cade on top of that, it's one of those few things that could kill him. But what we ended up finding out, I was right before. I just thought, like, last episode made me think I was wrong. But as it turns out, I was right. Because Enzo, and, you know, Cade is teaching Bonnie how to tap into her powers more. Because the fact is, she's special. because we end up finding out that Bonnie created her own world, much like Cade created his own hell from him dying and just that burst of emotion. He felt that last psychic scream before he died. It seemed like Bonnie did the same thing with Enzo, and Enzo's trapped in her world that she created, which is in the form of that cabin that they spent so much time in that burned down earlier this season. Her way of trying to get Enzo to turn his humanity back on and come back to her. But Cade's taking an interest in her because he's never come across anyone like her before, being able to do that. The only person he's ever met that's able to do that is himself. And so he's meeting someone else who can do that. And because the fact is, Enzo is his soul, so he's very like, oh, I need to get him back, but she's keeping him hidden away. So just, it's just crazy on its own, which kind of goes back to the point that maybe the only person that will be able to stop Cade is Bonnie, but she'd have to do it. She'd have to become like Cade to do it. And I don't know. Because something I was thinking about is like, the only way she could ever prevent herself from becoming like Cade is if she became a vampire. Maybe when it's all said and done, if she's able to bring Enzo back, because his soul is there. I mean, but his body's no longer around too, so there's no going back for that either, is there? It's like, how do you get around that? I mean, I guess it's the same situation with Kai trying to get him in both worlds, so I'm guessing it's like, if you can drag him back, he'll automatically have another body, or maybe she puts Enzo's soul in another body, kind of like the whole Phoenix Stone situation, which that wouldn't even be possible, because that got destroyed last season? Yeah, last season, I think. Yeah. So... But what I was thinking, like, if she became a vampire, that would kind of destroy her psychic link thing. I mean, not unless that meant she would end up becoming a, like the heretics, like witches with the power of, vampires with the power of magic essentially on their side, like, you know, Valerie and the others. So, not unless she became something like that. I don't know. This was a crazy episode with a lot of stuff going down, and it's just like, what does this mean going forward? Because this marks another episode checking off the list, because we are now down to the final 3 episodes of the series. So no telling what things could go down. Obviously, you might have been seeing the previews of like, oh, the series finale on March 10th, which is very interesting because I've never seen them put that much effort like ahead of time. I mean, granted, maybe they did that back in the day with Smallville, because Smallville's the only show I can remember that's obviously, because this is like one of its longest running shows, because the show has been running for like 8 years now. Because I think it started back in 2009, so, I mean, definitely 8 years now, because it's the 8th season. Stupid. But nevertheless, it's just, it's going to be, you know, especially what it seems like they're alluding to, because it has always been the big question, like, oh, is that going to happen? Is a certain somebody going to come back? Obviously, Elena. Like, that's the question. Will Nina Dobrev return as Elena, at least for the series finale? It makes sense that she would, because obviously we're skipping around it. Like, it comes down to a lot of stuff. I'm thinking she will. I have no idea how this is all going to end. And that's the great thing about this situation. Like, I'm sad it's ending, but I'm super excited to find out how it ends. I guarantee you when it's all said and done, I'm going to get that feeling in my gut like I did with Banshee, with Person of Interest, with Beauty and the Beast, which all ended last year. It's like I had that gut feeling in my stomach. It's like I was happy, but at the same time super sad to see these shows that I really liked and cared for just come to an end like that. So I'm sure I'll feel the same thing. But till then, I'm gonna enjoy this little ride that's left. Especially, it also excites you because you know it's like that also means the originals is like right around the corner. Because if you don't know and didn't catch it, the originals airs like the week after the Vampire Diaries series finale. So like right after the next following week, you have the originals coming back. So, and now moving on to this week's episode of Grimm. Such a good episode. I loved it. That basically, essentially everyone kind of got, because of a vesting at the hotel that everyone was staying, because it's Monroe's birthday, everyone got together and celebrated. Nick, Adeline, Eve, Hank, Wu, all there to kind of celebrate. Basically, there's a vesting that works there, and he's pissed at Nick because Nick arrested his dad. Obviously, like Nick ends up bringing it up later in the episode, but it's like 7 years prior, and it's because him and his dad didn't. Because I figured as much early on, because it's like he kept referring to him as Burkhart, and I'm like, and he never once used a G word. I'm like, oh, he doesn't know Nick's a Grimm. Because I was also wondering about the whole situation, because as we've seen in the past, certain things like this don't mix well with a Grimm, so I thought things were going to have an adverse effect. Like maybe it wasn't going to 100% work on them, but it's like it did. It worked on everyone except for Rosalie because she was the only one not drinking because it's like, well, she's pregnant and everything. But I just love the mix matchness. It's like, okay, you had Nick in love with Rosalie, Monroe in love with Eve in love with Nick, Adeline in love with Monroe, Wu in love with the waitress, Holly, and then lo and behold, Hank in love with himself. Now that really got me because it's like he literally spent most of the episode in his room, in his underwear, just staring at just even got that music playing, just like "Let's Get It On" by Marvin Gaye. It's like, dude, I was like, this is so amazing. I love it. I just love that he ended up falling in love with himself. That was so good. I mean, because Hank basically says, like, oh, the fact is, if he had known that Nick was a Grimm, then maybe he would have been a little reluctant to do what he did. I was like, I don't think he would have. But it's just the interestingness of, like, basically them all going back and forth and just trying to trail after each other. Just, it's because, you see them kind of, like, spending time together. Obviously, Rosalie and Monroe and then, like, Nick and Adeline are laying down, sleep, and then they, obviously the night before, and they wake up and they're just like, I need to go get some coffee. And it's just like they're so weird and acting differently, and then they lay eyes on each other, and just the sparks appear. I even love the fact is Wu hitting on Holly so hard that she's like, okay, that's sweet. He's even kind of reciting poems, and he's just like, oh, your beauty, oh, your love. If I can't have your love, I'd rather die. Even kind of at one point, even threatening to kill himself because of it. It never came up later on in an episode. Maybe Wu had explained himself. He's like, I'm sorry, I was like super drunk. Or something, because it was like he was just following her around. It's like, oh, you're my love. Oh, do you believe in love at first sight? Saying some very sweet stuff because we've never really seen Wu in a relationship before. So it was kind of interesting seeing him hit on somebody. I mean, obviously he's not in his right mindset, but it's like, I mean, it makes you wonder would anything like. I wanted to get more of that. I wanted to see a situation where she would be like, oh my God, you are going to kill yourself over me. Like, maybe in some weird way she'd be like, oh my God, like, I'm so in love with you. It's like, here's my number. Just call me anytime. Like, did you really truly believe in love? And then Wu has to be like, oh, I was just out of my damn mind. And she's like, oh, so you're just playing with my heart or something. But like I said, we didn't get that. It would have been interesting, but it's fine. Like I said, it had to be super awkward for Wu to be like, yeah, I'm sorry about kind of stalking you and everything. That was very unprofessional on me. Let's just pretend none of that happened. And then, like, because what's most interesting about the whole situation is, even though Eve was talking, obviously, from, like, a mindset of, like, oh, man, this is this potion, this guy's powers and everything, but I'm sure that somewhere inside it was speaking the truth, because, like, she's always, especially because she's becoming more Juliet than she was Eve, because even the way she talks, like, if you look at her mannerisms and the way she acts, like, especially in this episode, like, obviously going to, like, the beginning when we saw that whole situation where, like, she saw that thing in a mirror, which is like, what the hell was that? It's some, like, gray thing. It's like, is that a Vessin or is that something else? Because it's got connected to the world of death, because it's like, it came, like, the vortex it was in was the same vortex she was in when she got the death grip. She points that out. And it, like, it's kind of like, is that thing connected to the afterlife? Is it some kind of Vessin version of death or something? Is it something sealed out there? Is it connected to the stick? I mean, obviously it's got to be connected to the stick, because it's like that dude had those symbols on his face, and it's like, so what? I mean, this the question: is that the afterlife, or is that actually something else? Is that a world that exists in between? Is that something sealed in there? Maybe it's connected to the stick. Maybe that, because Nick and Eve are the only ones that really had a lot of interaction with the stick. So maybe that's what that's all about too. Maybe that thing, maybe the stick acts as a key to unlocking wherever that world is, or maybe it's connected to it, because as we know, it has some power. So I'm very interested to find that out. But like the way she was like, Nick, like freaking out like that, and just a casual conversation we're having, it's like, even I was like, she's acting very much like Juliet, because remember, as Eve, she was very stoic, and it's just like as time goes on, more and more of her personality shifts over to Juliet. So like I said, it's just interesting, because even the conversation came up early in the episode between her and Diana, because Diana's like, usually my stomach hurts when I'm feeling sad. It's like, are you sad that Nick's no longer your boyfriend? It's like, do you want to be back with him? And she's like, sometimes it does, her stomach does hurt, and it's like, she knows that not a situation of knows, she feels like it wouldn't be fair, because it's like, obviously him and Adeline, plus like so much has changed, like more so than anything, it's because what happened, like, it was kind of the last straw before she ended up kind of going, before trouble ended up having to put her down at the end of season 4 was because she didn't know what was going to happen to Nick's mom. Which kind of got brought up by Diana too, because she's like, oh, I haven't seen my other mommy. Her name was Kelly too, because she doesn't, being a cute, adorable kid, she doesn't know the fact is that, doesn't even realize that was Nick's mom. At least I don't think she realizes. But she even asked, she's like, oh, do you know whatever happened to her? And you see, like, it never went further because Adeline came in, but it was like, you see it hit Eve. And I'm thinking, that's even more reason why she won't ever be with him is because she feels responsible. Like, I'm sure it's hard to say because Nick and Adeline are in a situation they're in. And like, because I was literally setting this up for a video that it might be coming up in the next week or two, but I was trying to get it out before Valentine's Day. That's all I'm going to say. But, the fact is they went through so much that's happened between them. It's like they are where they are now. So it kind of begs the question. It's like, it's not like it'd be unforgivable for him and Eve. I mean, to Juliet, especially because, there's another thing too, because we saw, like, during the struggle, like, obviously they're fighting over each other. It's like, oh, like, the fact of the matter, you even had Evie saying, like, oh, the fact is that, Nick shouldn't even be with you because the fact of the matter is, like, he would only, he's only essentially, like, with you because you got pregnant and everything. And the fact is that me and Nick should still be together. That should be our baby. So, like I said, there was some truth spit in there. Obviously, like, probably some, like, she probably would not have said that so bluntly, but, I do believe that those feelings are there. Like I said, they just keep getting more and more complicated. Obviously, she's bringing out the fact is that just trying to make it seem she's probably keeping a lot of that stuff buried deep inside because she doesn't want to complicate things for anybody. So, like I said, it's just, I don't know. You feel bad for her because, like, at that time, she wasn't in her right mindset. She was going through this whole change. But the thing I was going to bring up is the fact is Adeline was voguing out, but it never got to a situation where Eve did. That's kind of been something that's brought up. Obviously, she's changing. So I don't think she's no longer a hex and beast anymore, obviously. Like, because she, like, a couple episodes back, what was like the second episode, she tried to use her power, but she couldn't. So I'm thinking it's like she is no longer a hex and beast. It's not like she's no longer even a vest, and she's probably just a regular person now. But luckily for everyone, everything got ended pretty successfully because, obviously Rosalie wasn't affected because she didn't drink, and she kind of was calling the dude out. He was running away. He threatened to have Holly as, use her as, it's like, oh, get away from me or I'll kill her, which was the wrong thing to do with Wu standing there because Wu kind of vogued out or do the thing that he does, ended up knocking him off the cliff, and he ended up dying, and everyone went back to normal. So, everyone has memories, a little vague memories of why they were doing what they were doing and acting the way they were acting. Like I said, it was so good. This episode was like, more so than anything, it was just a lot of fun. Obviously a little twisted fun, but more so than anything, it was just like a very fun episode, especially because it's kind of reflecting upon a lot of stuff, like, because it got brought up, obviously, Rosalie and Monroe, like how, they're like that first moment, that first spark between them. And then also like Nick and Monroe, like literally the first episode of Grimm, like his real first experience with a Vesson, in this particular case, a blue bot. And the fact is, it brought up something interesting, and it's like, yeah, that's something interesting. Like, if it wasn't for Nick and Monroe meeting, none of them would be where they are right now. It's like that friendship, that meeting sparked all of this, all of them being where they are now, because it's like they've been on this wild, crazy adventure because of that one meeting. So it's such a beautiful thing, and it's just, I don't know, it was nice kind of reflecting like that, because I need to go back and watch the earlier seasons of Grimm. Like, I brought it up before, I don't really watch a lot of stuff more than once. So, like, I've not subsequently seen any other season of Grimm more than the one time that I've watched it. So, to anyone that is curious, I've never brought it up before, but I didn't start watching Grimm until it was like maybe a fourth of its way through its second season. And then I went back and, obviously watched, because my cousin had recommended the show to me, because she was like, oh, she really liked it. Because, like, her way of bringing it up to me, she was like, oh, it's slightly, because we're kind of Supernatural fans. Well, not kind of, we're definitely Supernatural fans. So she was like, it's kind of like Supernatural, but it doesn't, does its own thing. And it's like, oh yeah, that was kind of enough for me that I finally checked it out one day and fell in love with it. So just kind of wanted to include that. But another part of this episode I really just thought was just outright amazing is the whole Sean aspect of the episode, because obviously him and Diana are spending time together. Adeline told Diana to keep quiet about the whole symbols that she saw and everything, but she kind of let it slip. She's like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to tell you that they're inside of a tunnel. And he's like, oh, where's this tunnel located? Daddy, I'm not supposed to tell you. Just being so adorable. Because like I said, even though she's as powerful as she is, she's still a little girl. She doesn't quite understand. But he's like, oh, I guess it's a secret. But now it's like, now Sean's definitely going to be looking into this. But when Sean was busy, basically, the cop, that lieutenant guy who got pissed at Sean, I figured he was going to come back at some point. Just wasn't expecting him to come back in this shape. But he was just like, he was so pissed he came and kidnapped Diana. I was like, because you could see someone looking out in the woods, and I saw the beginning of the episode. I'm like, obviously he's there to kidnap her. And when he does, at first Sean is flipping. He's like, oh no, he's about to call for help. And then he's like, it's Diana they kidnapped. Never mind. Let me just go off and relax. And then the guy comes calling Sean. Sean's like, oh, that's not what it was. I wasn't in my right mind. He's like, yeah, but you're going to give me the position of captain. That's what you promised me. He's like, okay, just bring Diana back. Like, we don't have to do it. He's like, you better be careful. Your daughter's going to get hurt. And just, you have Sean be like, just continues to sit on the couch and just make a face like, oh well. And then Diana wakes up and she's like, I want to go. He's like, oh, you're not going to go into it. And Vogues and tries to scare her, but it doesn't work. She's like, and then she uses her powers and just waves her hand and sends him flying. And then she just literally gets him flying all over the place, like just toying with him just with a swipe of her hand like he's a doll or something. And then you have him calling Sean at one point. He's like, okay, just come get your daughter, please. And he's just like, I don't know, man. I got some other stuff to do. And Diana just walking up. She's like, that's not a good place to hide. And he's just like, no, my God, she's going to kill me. Sean shows up at the last moment. He's like, hey, Diana, did you have fun? She's like, yeah, Daddy, your friend was so much fun. It's like, can I come over and play again sometime soon? He's like, sure thing. It's just like, it's so twisted yet adorable. And even he's like, no more. And it's like, well, things did not take the turn I thought it would. Like, I thought he would have come after Sean directly. I figured, I knew that whole Nick situation would kind of screw him over like that, but did not expect things to play out like that. But the moment Sean was kind of relaxed, I was like, why is he? I was like, all right. Because it's Diana. She's literally one of the most powerful Vestans. I wondered that I guess she doesn't. Maybe it's because she's so young. Obviously, she has all this power at her disposal, but maybe she doesn't actually have a Vogue. Like, maybe she didn't, because I was wondering, she's half Zalber Beast, she's half Hexen Beast, but it's like, what does that mean for her? Like, if she were to Vogue, what would she look like? Because the closest thing we've seen is her purple eyes. That's the fullest extent of that. So that was just kind of like a little fun thing that I really appreciate. Like I said, it was more so than anything. Obviously, there was no big overall danger. Obviously, the whole everyone being in love with someone else and kind of ripping each other apart and Diana being kidnapped, but it was never a big deal. It was just kind of it was a lot of fun. It was just seeing how everything was twisted. What really breaks your heart is during the whole situation where Monroe's like, I can't lie to you anymore, Rosalie. I'm in love with Eve. In that moment, you see it, and it's you see her almost tearing up. It's like, dude, it's like the Simpsons thing. It's like, you can freeze frame it right here. You can see the exact moment where her heart broke. And it's like, dude, it's like, no, Rosalie, he's under a spell. Monroe doesn't mean that. He loves you now and forever. Luckily, after seeing everyone acting away, she easily pieced it together. But I was like, for a second, I was like, oh man, don't do that. It sucks, man. Like I said, other than that, it was just overall a very fun episode. And like I said, it was just kind of like an episode where it's just kind of like we're taking a little time away from the very serious stuff to just kind of have a little fun. It's just kind of the whole thing about this episode. So, and it really worked out. Like I said, very fun episode. Obviously, the very ending where it's just like, oh yeah, I want some champagne. It's on the house, and everyone's just looking like, no, we're good. So, definitely excited to see where we go next week's episode. Because obviously this episode I brought up the whole Eve situation. So it's obviously that's still an ever-developing thing. I'm just waiting for the moment where it really kind of takes off. This episode kind of, like I said, brought it up to a certain extent. But it's, more so than anything, everyone's going to chalk it up to be even Nick's going to be like, nah, that's not how Eve really feels. That was just kind of, her being, our heads being messed with. That's all that was. So Also, side note, no Meisner, at least to our knowledge, at least so far. So it seems like that situation is done. Like I said, it was just kind of left out. It was kind of like, and we're done with the whole Meisner situation. So it's like, oh, I guess it's supposed to represent the fact is that he's slightly choosing the right side. Like I said, it's definitely going to be interesting because obviously that's also setting up the fact is that he's going to be looking into this. Because eventually, because I thought that's what's going to happen with the whole Diana situation. I thought he's going to go off and search for the tunnel. I'm sure he probably spent some of the episode doing that. But then eventually he's going to piece it together. It's like, oh, and then eventually it's going to lead him to the stick. I mean, he's done with Black Claw, but what that 100% means, like whether or not he's going to always feel that way, we'll just kind of have to wait and see. But it makes you wonder what's going to happen when Sean does try. I mean, because the stick seems like it's obviously attached to Nick, so it doesn't seem like it would work for anyone. Even if he found it, it might hurt him upon finding it. Or maybe, obviously because they're at a point where they're kind of on good terms. Because even him and Adeline, because Adeline's dropping Diana off, is like, oh, so what are you guys going to do? It's like, oh yeah, she's talking about cooking some cookies and everything, and he's like, oh, how about pancakes? She's like, I'm cooking both, and it's just like, Adeline's, well, have fun. So it's like everyone's on good terms to a certain degree. So like I said, more so than anything, just very interested to see where our story takes us now. And now moving on to this week's episode of Sleepy Hollow, a very good episode, which a lot of interesting things came out. I mean, first of all, let's talk about the monster in this episode. It ended up being I forgot what the name of it is, but basically it's a wolf demon, which I should have immediately got, obviously the way it looks and everything. I mean, obviously, like I originally missed the beginning of the episode, so I didn't catch it. So I had to go back and rewatch the beginning just to see everything. But it's like, with the whole like situation of how it killed, even without seeing the monster, I should have known it was a werewolf, because that's kind of like apparently a werewolf thing eating hearts. Supernatural kind of brought that up. I don't see too many other things referencing that, but definitely Supernatural, the TV show, kind of brought that up. But nevertheless, and what makes this thing interesting, obviously it's not just like, oh, werewolf in this like sense of like, oh, like there's like a full moon and everything. Apparently this thing has the power to essentially mimic another person. Because obviously this is actually connected to a creature from back in early days, like back when the Mayflower originally came to Plymouth or whatever, like it snuck aboard, and basically this thing can mimic human people, and it basically impersonated a girl's father and made her come that way, and ended up killing her. And it turns out later on that like Ichabod brings it up that this girl was a witness, and so basically it's attracted to witnesses. And because, I mean, the big twist of the episode is like, oh yeah, Mitch, who is Molly's dad, which I'll kind of get into a little bit later on, but I just have to talk about this right now. And it turns out it's like, oh, that wasn't Mitch this entire time. It was this monster. And it's like, it did a good job, because obviously it's coming up. Like, it must have spent a long time getting to know. Like, how does it do that? I mean, it's not a perfect thing, because like, obviously Molly was able to trick him, being like, oh, you gave me a bike for Christmas, didn't you? It's like, oh, yeah. So because it's not even a situation where it killed Mitch, it took all his memories. It's like, no, I guess it somehow just kind of stalked them long enough that it could be like, oh, here's some information. Oh, here's someone I could be. I don't know. Like, maybe it stalked him for a while and was able to pick up the information. Like, we really didn't ever find out how it did. I mean, really, it's kind of a mystical thing. So it's like, why get too caught up in it? But it's like, dude, I did not see that twist coming. I was thinking, like, obviously the monster's going to be in town. And I'm like, oh, man, Mitch is in town, too. And I was like, oh, man, is he going to stumble across this? Because a big part of the episode is also, like, Diana figuring out what she's going to do about Mitch. Because, like, obviously Mitch is obviously Molly's dad. But it's like, Diana and Mitch aren't actually a couple. They're actually just their parents. But they're a couple, but they're not married. It was a situation where, like, they were both in the military, in particular the Marines. But it's like, it was a situation where Diana just never felt like, it was kind of the right call, to get married, because they were fine the way they were. I guess it's kind of like a situation where it's like he never brought it up and neither did she. It's kind of a situation like, why mess up a situation that's pretty okay and pretty good? Which Crane himself kind of brings up. He's like, it's not my place to kind of bring this up, but it's like, is this circumstance okay with Molly? She's like, well, yeah, of course it is. He talks about his own experience. He's like, the fact is I wasn't there for my son and he harbored that against me for a long time. So it's basically like Molly might be pretending it's okay, but maybe there's a part of her that misses like having a father figure around that. Maybe it's something that Diana had to think about. It's like, yeah, they're a good team together, but maybe on some level she would prefer to have her dad around. I mean, or she might grow up like hating him for not being around. I mean, obviously he's in the military, so he can't be around. It's not really 100% his choice. I mean, obviously certain aspects of it, like whether he decides to go back or not. I mean, but that was conversation, and it's getting all close to Diana and everything. It's like, oh, I want this to work. And it's just like, it did such a good job imitating him. And I thought that was such a cool thing. I mean, not cool in the sense of like, oh man, like that, you get what I mean. Because it turns out apparently that Molly's the one that kind of drew him in because Diana hasn't really dived too deeply into this witness thing. She's kind of been very vague about it. She obviously sat down and gave Molly the talk, but she wasn't really that informative about it. It's actually something that kind of got brought up at the beginning of the episode. It's like, it's something I kind of brought up before as like, oh, the fact is that Diana kind of has to be there for Molly. She's like, oh, I can kind of take her place as a witness, not necessarily take her place, but act as her shield and kind of fight on the monsters and stuff in her way, and then it's kind of like, well, then you have Crane being like, it won't work like that. That is something that's just Molly will have to do. It's like, obviously we work together to make sure to mitigate any problems or issues going her way. But at the end of the day, it's going to have to be something she has to deal with. And, it's all going back to the point of like Diana trying to control the situation. It's like she wants to, she's a very protective mother. She loves her daughter and she wants to keep her safe. So she's going to try and do everything. Like I said, I brought up my thoughts like later on. I mean, obviously it's no longer a possibility because of Philosopher's Stone. It's gone. But I was like wondering like, oh, could she try and force like Molly's destiny as the witness onto herself? I mean, it is a very powerful thing, which I'll kind of get into that later, but Molly is the one who summoned it because basically she started drawing a lot of symbols because she's basically looking into the witnesses herself, like doing her own research. And basically all the symbols she drew kind of acted as a beacon to draw it in. Now, going back to it, I mentioned earlier that one of the girls it killed back in Plymouth was actually a witness. So it's like, it seems like it targets witnesses. Obviously, the other girls that it killed in this episode were just appetizers. So what I'm wondering is it because of a witness is special in the sense of like, oh, the witness is in this battle of good versus evil, so that means kind of like, it's like, oh, this is someone that can hurt us at, Grimm, like the veil of evil supernatural creatures is like, oh, this thing could hurt us, so it's like, why not go out of our way to eat it? Or, get rid of it, kind of remove it from the board? Or is it a situation where it's like, I guess in this monster's case, it's like maybe witnesses are delicacies. I'm partially leaning more to that way. Like, it's like maybe witnesses' hearts taste better or something like that. That's as far as I thought. Because another interesting thing that came up about witnesses, which never really came up before, is witnesses kind of come into being witnesses at the age of 11, which this episode was Molly's birthday. That's why, apparently that's when it kind of really kicks in. So that's why it won't really kill her until like midnight is what. Well, it wasn't her birthday. It wasn't her birthday until the end of the episode. But nevertheless, I just thought that was kind of interesting. And like I said, it was also interesting kind of getting to see that side of Diana. Because the thing is, I think I just assumed Molly's dad was like no longer either, obviously the first time he pops up, I'm like, oh, they must be divorced or something. It's like, oh, they were never married. So it's not like a split relationship type of situation. It's like, oh, he's off in the military, but he does check in every once in a while. I mean, he's not like he's not like an absentee dad. He does care and he does check in. So it's not like he completely ignores her. Part of me was wondering, it's like, oh, could there be something more to it? Like, oh, he's actually married or something and it's a complicated situation. It doesn't seem like that. I mean, like I said, it's just it did bring up a question though, like the whole like Diana and Mitch situation is like, even though it wasn't really Mitch, it probably did present a lot of questions and things that, Diana probably will have to wonder about when she gets the opportunity. She has to talk to the real Mitch about what their future holds, and like what they're going to do about the whole Molly situation. Will they get together and stuff like that? The thing that crossed my mind during the episode, I was like, because it's like, oh, Molly having a father figure is like, well, Crane's there, because it kind of got brought up by the monster being like, it was like, oh yeah, I don't want to come between you and your boyfriend. It's like, oh, Crane's not my boyfriend, but it's like Molly's taking a liking to him, and it's like, oh, maybe, like, I mean, I don't know, because that was always the thing, like, oh, there might have been something between him and Abby, and it seems like that might have been the case, but now I'm like, what if that ends up being the case? What if this is like Crane's second chance at a family? Maybe that's what this might lead to, is like, maybe him and Diana develop feelings for each other. Obviously he will be kind of a mentor / father figure for Molly going forward, because it's like, oh, he has to be the one to kind of explain the whole like witness thing, because obviously he's been a witness a lot longer. It does seem like in this season we are going to go a little more deeper into the witness like lore, because it's like even with Abby, they touched on it from time to time, but it never really went in depth. Like we don't really know everything there is to know about witnesses. Even Crane knows some stuff here and there just from stuff he's read, but even then it's not clear cut of like, oh, this is what a witness is here, here, and there. Something interesting to get brought up in the episode, like, oh, the fact is that there was something from the Bible basically saying that when a witness is in danger, fire shall come from their mouth to kind of defend themselves against whatever's attacking them. So. But like I said, this could be interesting. Like if that were to happen between him and Diane, it's like it doesn't have to be forced. It could just be like something that naturally happens. But I'm saying if it did happen, it'd be kind of interesting because it'd be Crane's second chance at having a family. Like, you know, because he never really got an opportunity to really enjoy his family because he didn't know he had a son. Plus, him and Katrina were kind of separated for a while. Then they came together, and then just things unveiled, and it ended up ending with both his son and his wife gone, which it does make you wonder, will that kind of come up? I don't know. It'd be kind of cool if that did come up. Like, you know, I don't know what the actress who played Katrina is up to, so she might not even be available, even if they wanted her to. But it might be something that they don't really want to go back on. I mean, I think it'd be kind of interesting because obviously we have the return of the Headless Horseman, so and obviously like it was a fake. You know, obviously it was part of a delusion created by the monster that had him, but, you know, Henry kind of came up, especially because Henry and Katrina, obviously not directly Katrina, but like, you know, they've been kind of referenced in conversations. So it's kind of like maybe that'd be something to kind of come up in the future to kind of complicate things a little more. I feel like, you know, Crane has lost a lot in his life over his time being a witness and everything. He lost the original home he had. Obviously, he's still here, obviously in America, but now it's like, you know, after everyone else he's always known is gone. So it's like, you know, it feels like you want, obviously he has his friends and everything, but you want him to have something more. I mean, he did have a girlfriend for a little while. Wasn't that back in season 3, but things didn't kind of work out because she like at first she was kind of worried because, you know, her and Crane were constantly missing each other, and it was just kind of a circumstance of like she eventually found out it's like, oh, you're up against all of this, and it's like I guess it's just not going to work out. So it's like that's why I was always kind of like, oh, obviously you and Abby, but then like Abby and Reynolds were a thing, so it's kind of like I don't know. Like I said, it just be an interesting thing to go about. Another thing that popped up in this episode was Joe. Joe apparently is still alive. Jenny had him captured for a little while, but basically she ended up having to let him go with the whole Molly situation, which that's what I was going to bring up earlier, but I kind of lost my train of thought. Was like, I was quickly referencing the fact is that I do appreciate that it had a Red Riding Hood aspect to it, because it's like, oh, you had her running in the woods with a red coat on, and that basically the bit bad wolf pretending to be someone that you love, and you know, whereas in the story it's Grandma, but in this version it's Mitch, her dad. So that was just kind of interesting. I mean, it was kind of like interesting because like at the beginning of the episode, Crane warned her to like, oh yeah, you know, as a witness, you should always listen and follow to your instincts. Hence why she kind of figured out, I was like, oh, this guy isn't my dad. She had a weird feeling and she went with it, and that kind of saved her life. So, I mean, it's scary to have to be welcomed into that world like that. Like I said, you know, Diana kind of it wasn't even a situation where Diana wanted to slowly work her way into it. It's probably a situation where Diana just didn't want her to know about that at all. It's like, oh, I want you to know you're a witness and you're supposed to help people. That's as far as she didn't want her to know, like, oh, that means battling against things like this, you know, demons and monsters and stuff like that. So, but, getting back to the Joe situation, he brought up the fact is that he was able to tell that Jenny was possessed. And I was like, huh, this is kind of interesting. Like, obviously, because he's like, oh, we can always tell when our kindness touched somebody or something. So the fact is they reference that, I'm wondering, is that going to turn into something? Because, you know, obviously he was trying to get inside of Jenny's head. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't have access. Like, obviously it's not a situation where he can read her head. Because I was thinking like, oh, you're going to bring up Joe Corbin or something like that. But it never came up. So it's not a situation like they can get inside of her head. But another thing that came up in this episode is kind of Jenny ended up asking the question like, why are you working with Dreyfus? It's like, because obviously you want to take his soul because that's part of the whole contract. She's like, I know, I don't really understand. I probably don't know the first thing there is to know about demon contracts, but it's like him kind of trying to weasel his way out of the deal. Isn't that kind of a bad thing? Which is a question I brought up before. Like, I thought, like, you know, I brought it up last episode. I thought the whole situation would be like, oh, use the Philosopher's Stone and he gains all the souls or something that was happening. But that obviously turned out not to be the case. It's still like, why is Joe working with her? What is he getting out of this? And it turns out like at the end of the episode, we see Dreyfus and like his eyes go back and his veins are kind of popping and they're black. And so, Joe doesn't really react. He's just looking at him. And I'm thinking, like, what if this is all about turning Dreyfus into a vessel? What if he's becoming more and more demon-like? The reason why Joe's actually helping him and nudging him along to become this immortal is because, maybe like I brought it up, maybe this will all lead back to season the original main antagonist. Maybe they're trying to resurrect him, but they need a human vessel, and it's like making Dreyfus into this monster, this demon, into this immortal, so that he's the perfect vessel. Even if that's not the case, necessarily bring him back. Maybe it's about bringing someone else back, or maybe it's just about making him like the new leader of the demons or hell or whatever the case may be. So, because obviously Joe is getting something out of this. Because there's the question, is like, why are you so loyal to him? Because it's like, you're a demon, you have a contract, and now you're helping him weasel out of it. So it is a very valid question. So. And what exactly does Dreyfus himself have planned? Obviously, he's got his new immortality and whatnot. So he ended up firing all those people that was on his board, because he no longer needs them and whatnot. So it's kind of like he's basically he wants to change the world. Obviously, he's changed. He's been reborn. He feels different. He doesn't feel the same anymore. He's like, oh, I went on a long, 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 long journey, because he's been missing these past couple episodes. I mean, not episodes, I meant days. So it does beg the question, what is it that he does want? And if Dreyfus is immortal, it's like, how do you go about stopping someone that's immortal? I mean, to be fair, Crane and them have taken down a god, so it's not like it's an impossibility, like, oh, they've never faced challenges before. They've faced many, many different challenges, so it's like this wouldn't be too out there for them. So I'm very interested to see what happens going forward with this. As like I said, especially with the new development of Molly being a little more open, because, Diana's deciding, she's like, you know what, this all happened because I wasn't more open with you. So she's like, from now on going forward, I'm going to be more open with you. Obviously, Crane, the aspects about Crane's life, about him being older than what he is, obviously not really come up, but I wonder, will it eventually? I'm super curious to see. Like I said, I've been so interested to find out what it means with Molly being the witness. It's like, we've never, in this story, we've never dealt with such a young witness before. But like I said, it's also, like, as we've seen, there's been other witnesses, like, and in particular, that girl witness that got killed in Plymouth. So, like I said, it seems like this season heavily going to focus on the witnesses as well. So maybe, like I said, I brought up earlier, kind of dive more heavily into who the witnesses are and what they're, obviously, battle versus good and evil, but it's like, what does that mean? What is it exactly that they're supposed to do in this fight? Obviously, just do their best to go down the right path. Obviously, that's kind of how Crane views it, but what exactly does that entail? Hopefully, we'll find out soon enough. And now moving on to this week's episode of Emerald City. Almost forgot for a second. What we ended up finding out in this episode, what Glinda and Rowan's relationship is. I mean, Lucas, but now he's just full on Rowan. The fact is that he is her husband. And it turns out, it seems like they weren't married for a long time. In particular, the way Glinda talks about it, seems like they've only been together for like 2 years, which doesn't really mean anything, but it's not like it's like a long-standing relationship, because a big part of this episode is like, the fact is that he has a conflicted heart. I mean, the point I was making is like, the fact is, it's like, oh, you traded your life in to be with me. That the fact is, we keep our secrets from the world, but not from each other. So basically, at one point in time, he was a loyal not Crimson Guard. He was a loyal knight, but then it turned around. Then he met Glinda, and it changed everything. I'm very interested to find out what exactly went down to make him decide to do that. Was it love at first sight? Was it his first time ever? Because as one of the knights, it's like, you look down on magic as like it's the most disgusting thing ever. I mean, we don't really know if that's 100% how the knights feel. I mean, whether that's just something like they just feel that way because it's like, well, the wizard feels that way. Because I mean, once again, it's just, to him, this war's all about proving just how mighty science is over magic. But a big part of this episode's effect is Rowan has a conflicted heart. Especially when Glinda finds out, it's like, oh, what else happened between you and this woman when you didn't have your memories? He's like, well, the fact of the matter is, it was your fault. You put this spell on me. You got rid of my memories. She's like, I got rid of your memories, not your heart. It's like which is kind of like, you could argue it's like, playing devil's advocate, you'd be like, well, that kind of goes hand in hand. It's like the heart. I mean, but then you actually look at it as like, at first I was about to be like, well, the fact of the matter is the heart doesn't know what to feel when it doesn't have the memories to associate with. But then it's like, that's just his brain's memory. His heart should have remembered. But the fact is his heart quickly was, swayed by the evilness that is Dorothy, which is like, no, it's just like, I mean, because obviously Dorothy kind of learns in this episode, like, oh, the wizard's actually a pretty bad dude. We've already known that. We learned it even more in this episode, because it turns out that Tip is obviously this princess that was brought up last episode, but it turns out her family was brutally murdered by the wizard. In particular, he had a lion knight do it, which, like, from the very beginning, just the way he was so ferocious and everything, I was like, it had to be Iman. I felt like he had to be the lion, and it turns out to be the case. Like, the moment I saw the lion head, I was like, oh, that's the lion. I was like, it's totally got to be him. He's the only one, because he's kind of like the best warrior. So I'm like, I already kind of called that from the beginning. So I just didn't think it would be such a literal. I figured it might have been some literal thing, like magic turned him into a lion or something like that, or I don't know. Like, it's kind of more so a personification as a warrior. Like, he puts on that helmet, I guess, it's kind of like in the heat of battle, he does what he gathers the strength, kind of the spirit of a lion to cut through all those, kind of like become kind of a wild animal in a sense, I guess. Because he did that while he's done other stuff without the helmet on, but it's like, in that particular case, I mean, more so than anything, it was when the wizard was trying to take Emerald City. And it's like, he didn't just get Emerald City, he took it with force. And it's like, holy crap, by wiping out not just her family, but any royals that could potentially kind of take claim to it. So it's like, Tip is the missing princess to Emerald City. I can only assume Amon had something to do with that. Because it's like, obviously he's not going to kill a child, even though I'm sure the wizard would want him to, because he has a kid of his own, so he's going to be a little more reluctant to go down that route, I guess. I mean, which doesn't change anything. If it's just going to set Tip on a path of vengeance, because obviously I'm just bouncing all over the place. I do apologize. I need to focus on one thing at a time. Going back to Dorothy and Rowan and Glinda. We ended up finding out Sophie's real name. Her real name is Leith. At first, she's not really fitting in with everyone else, and the girls even use their magic to take her food, but eventually she kind of stands up to them and takes not just girls that sit beside her, but also everyone else's food. She takes her own food back, and everyone's just like, oh yeah, she kind of feels accepted. Because before, Rowan was walking by and she's like trying to reach out for him, but he was like, no, like kind of keeping his distance, because it's like they can't have that type of relationship, because it's like, oh, this is supposed to be discipline, and for her to come into her magic. It's just so sad, because like in this episode, Dorothy lost it all. She had Lucas when she came in here, she had Sophie, people who cared about her and she cared about them, but it's like when it was all said and done, she didn't have them anymore. Because obviously, Dorothy was helping out with the lady that she was locked up with, which I'm pretty sure that's the same lady from earlier in the season that basically she got in trouble for the fact is that she got pregnant. Glinda got pissed at her, and the wizard got pissed at the guy that knocked her up, her love. It's sad because they were in love, but it's like, as part of the High Council, she's supposed to be celibate, so now she's kind of getting punished for that. And then the wizard punished the dude by killing him, which is kind of more where Dorothy's like, oh, the wizard's not that good. Because she even goes like, the lady even goes like, the fact is we worry about all these different monsters, the beast forever and stuff like that. But it's like, the true monster is the wizard. Which, to be fair, I don't think, like I say, it's a situation where Glinda's not necessarily that much better. Where, I mean, I get why she's pissed at the wizard. I mean, basically, when you think about it, the wizard is trying so hard to commit genocide because he wants to wipe out all witches. Luckily, Glinda and West and East, I guess, proved to be not a threat, because most of the witches died against the last time the Beast Forever came and wiped out most of the witches. So it's like, all three witches, what can they do against my science? Like I said, he's very egotistical. He's very narcissistic, thinking he's so great and powerful. Hence the whole thing. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing about the wizard anyway, pretending to be someone he's not, just to fool people and thinking, oh, I've got all this magical power. Nevertheless, you see that moment where Glinda looks at Dorothy when she's helping the lady give birth. She's even helping out herself, but you see it in her eyes. They're tearing up a little bit, especially when Rowan's beside her and they're helping give birth to that baby. Because because at that moment, I'm like, obviously there's the whole celibate thing, but I'm thinking that's coming from the fact is I don't know whether it's because she's a witch herself that she can't give birth. I'm guessing the only person that can give birth to other people is South, their mother. It's the only way I'm interpreting it out, or maybe it's something Glinda herself can never do because she's like, oh, what did you feel when you saw that baby? Was it, did it? He's like, I felt the longing. She's like, oh, is it because you know that I can never give you that, a child? But he's like, no, the reason why he felt like that was because at that moment he felt like he didn't have Glinda, and it's just like, or, Dorothy. And it's like, it's sad because he has a conflicted heart, because obviously he loved Glinda and that was his wife. But at the same time, all the time he spent with Dorothy, like, no matter how much you want to say, like, obviously Dorothy means a lot more to you, because if she didn't, the time, like, you spent a short amount of time with her. You've been with Glinda for at least 2 years, but for her to be able to implant herself that deeply into your heart, like you said, because the heart doesn't forget. So even if you did love Glinda, which is to say you did, the fact is you really love Dorothy. It's a very complicated situation, and it's sad that his heart's kind of split that way. I mean, it's definitely sad for Dorothy because she loved him, and now it's just like, well, I mean, now she's in a position, well, Dorothy kind of got Glinda back to a certain extent, almost trying to kill her. Mainly because, I mean, she really would have succeeded. I did not think it was going to go down like that. Like, she wraps her up in her covers as trying to choke her, almost killing her. Very reminiscent of another NBC show, Grimm. Kind of same thing happened last season. I mean, it got kind of brought up this season, the whole Rachel and Diana situation, but that's a different show. But the thing is, I thought it was kind of, like, I was just like, wow, because Glinda was powerless. She couldn't even fight back, mainly because she got caught off guard. But it's like, even as powerful as Glinda was, like, she almost died like that. If it wasn't for Rowan stepping in to be like, don't do that, and, Dorothy would have killed her, just because there's also a whole bunch of girls that they enter like an almost catatonic state, because basically Glinda's training them and pushing them, and then Dorothy's like, you don't need to do this. She's like, yeah, she would if she needed to, just to stop the wizard, she would definitely would sacrifice every single girl that's there if it meant the purposes of stopping the wizard, which is like, you get her reasoning for doing it. Like, this is a war she has to win, because if she doesn't, like, the wizard, it will not stop this time. It's just he won't just kill off a few witches, he will wipe them off the map, because they've stepped up and challenged him, and he doesn't like to be challenged. Once again, egotistical. So it's kind of an all or nothing battle coming up. But it's just like, the fact is you're getting these little girls involved. If these were warriors, if these were women, that's a different story. It still sucked, but it'd be a little more understanding. These are girls that, in Dorothy's eyes, it's kind of like you're forcing them to be these warriors that they're not. Forcing them to come into the magic, even like too quickly, because you're pushing them to the point that they're entering catatonic states, which I guess is kind of similar to the girl from last episode. The only way to kind of help her situation was Wes basically removing, well, I guess it wasn't really her soul, because basically we'll end up finding out a little bit more. Because what I was thinking is that the whole situation with East, I thought the point was, like, during her funeral was to get her spell so they can learn it. But it's like, no, that's kind of a ritual they do with witches. Instead of keeping their bodies, ashes, what they do is they put their spells in a urn, and that kind of represents their essence. They live on through their spells, their magic that's left in that crypt of theirs. So I'm assuming it's kind of a similar situation. So the only way that they'd probably be better off is if, like, someone would have to kill them to kind of end their suffering. But Dorothy seeing that and just knowing she doesn't want Sophie to end up like that, then it just kind of snapped her. But then, like, Glinda got super pissed when after it was all said and done, because Rowan's just standing there and she's like, why aren't you going after her? Go get her. She's like, the man that I once loved would have torn her apart, ripped her heart out, killed her in an instant for doing what she did. But you hesitated. You're sitting here. He's basically like, then rip out my heart. Essentially, basically say, make me into the man, return my feelings, make me into the man I was before. And she's like, the only way that's going to happen is if he does it. And the way he does that is by killing Dorothy, which he doesn't want to do. But she's like, either you do it or I do it. Once again, bringing up the point, it's hard to say who's in the right in this situation. It's actually a situation where they're like I said, I love the twist, because I've never read the book, so obviously this is based off, like, obviously Glinda's always known as the good witch, and now you find out it's like, man, she's kind of mean that she's willing to kill people, like, because obviously the moment Dorothy, like, she found out about the whole Dorothy and Lucas situation, she was immediately like, yo, we got to get rid of Dorothy. So Like Dorothy tried to get Sophie to come with her, but Sophie wasn't because now she's been accepted and now she feels like, for one, she doesn't have to feel like she's alone anymore because the fact is that they accept her now and now she's with other people like herself, so she never doesn't have to be with Dorothy or Lucas anymore. I mean, more so than anything, maybe she's decided, maybe it also means if she stays there, that means she'll also be able to stay with Rowan, but I feel like that's probably a part of her that she's shutting down too, so I don't know. I'm surprised Glinda didn't say anything. Maybe she didn't recognize that Dorothy had the gauntlets on. I mean, no one really realizes it until she uses her powers because that's when they kind of make themselves appear. But even when she was running away, I guess Glinda didn't get a peek at him because she didn't say anything about it. Wes noticed immediately, but it's like Glinda didn't. So, which since we brought up, well, I'll quickly talk about it. Because of the whole situation of like, oh, Tip wants to be more powerful. It's like, oh, get your revenge on the wizard who took your family from you. It's like, drink East magic. And Tip's like, I'm not going to drink your sister's insides. It's like, it's the only way you're going to get powerful. And she does it. And obviously it returns her memories and stuff like that. Hence how I know about the whole, how we know about the whole Lionhead situation. Then, it seems like she dies. And so Wes kind of puts her into a water, kind of lays her to rest. And she's actually sad. Like I think, because for West, she looked at Tip as kind of a last chance because to have something to love and someone to love her in return is kind of why she wanted to help out the other witches that might be, Glinda's witches that might have been here in Emerald City. So it's kind of the same thing. She just because more so than anyone, Tip is actually on her side as one of the few people who because especially when West looks at Tip, she sees a lot of herself. So. And then so this pushes her to decide, like she goes to Glinda. She's like, Glinda, let me see our mother. The fact is I'm clean, no drugs in my system. I'm clear-headed. I'll work with you this time. Just telling me where our mother is. Because it's like she kind of has nothing now. And it's like she can't go back to the wizard and just like after everything that's happened. Because she was just mad at Glinda for all the lies about her mom being dead when she isn't dead. But Glinda won't tell her because it's like, no, because you'll put mother in danger, essentially. So, because she even brings up the fact is that you were kind of her prize pupil, that you were supposed to be the one that was supposed to be her heir to take over things. But then you just fell apart. Which, to be fair, we brought up and found out last episode, like her main reason for falling apart was because she blamed herself for what happened to her sisters. Glinda, I guess, took that rage and just kind of used it as a means of motivating herself to keep going, to keep her sisters alive. But I guess for West, it was just kind of too much and it just kind of devoured her, essentially. But being turned down by Glinda, not having Tip anymore, not having her mom, she just felt like she was all alone, that it wasn't worth it anymore. So using her magic, she slit open her wrists and started to bleed. But then luckily at the end of the episode, we have Tip popping up, which just means so much. Because for one, that means, well, West isn't alone in this, so she's got Tip by her side. So I think that'll slightly make her situation a little bit better. Not sure where that'll go going forward with Glinda, especially if like Tip has magic now, what that means, how Glinda will react to that. Also, what this means for Emin, like, Tip is going to be going after him because Tip doesn't know what he actually looks like without the helmet. But obviously, we saw him pulling out the helmet at the end of the battle, getting ready for war. So they'll cross paths soon enough, I guess. Because that's where this is all heading. And it's like, as time goes on, the war is getting closer and closer. On the flip side of things, we had to deal Jack's circumstances. He's waking up. He's like, oh man, feeling refreshed and everything. And there's kind of a butler and maid there being like, oh, do you want to take a bath? But then he kind of shows his body. He's like, all right, you're not really in position to take a bath. It's like, oh, well, we can oil you up if you want us to. And it's just kind of like, you had this look of shock on his face because it's like, as we found out last episode, oiling Jack up can be very sensual. I guess it's the most PG PG way I guess I can put that. Which would be super awkward. I wonder, did they actually do it? He was probably like, no, I'll do it myself. But he tries to, talk with Langdelier, but it's like, he can't because it's like a situation where it's like, it ends up coming up later in the episode. He's basically like, he's cast aside. It's like, she wants a one moment, but then he's kind of a nuisance that needs to be, it's like, oh, go away. I'm dealing with business that you have no part of because like, you're my slave, essentially. You're just my property. So you have no business here. Go somewhere else and be there when I need you to be. Until then, just go away. And it just, you see, because Jack cares for her and he thought she cared for him too, which she does, but it's like, it kind of means nothing. It's like, only at certain points can he have her attention and her love, essentially. And he goes visit Jane, which to me I find very interesting. Like he was super excited to go visit Jane and everything. Because at first it seemed like he hated Jane, but then I guess it's kind of like you stew with something long enough. She gave him new life. She gave him a second chance. So he appreciates that. I mean, he obviously it took a while to get adjusted to his new body. I mean, his new reality essentially. So it's understandable he would be pissed at first, but it seems like he's come to actually like her. I mean, because he actually wanted to stay with her originally before being sold off to Landelier, but what we ended up finding out is like, Jane is actually being fired because she doesn't want to build guns. I mean, which is understandable because it's like building things as her forte. She likes building stuff, obviously, but she doesn't want to build weapons because she doesn't want to be the call. Because, it's like obviously, this is a big war that's coming up and a lot of people will die, and she most likely doesn't want to have all that on her, that blood on her hands. Because even if she's not the one pulling the trigger, she helped create the weapons to have those triggers pulled. She looks at Jack as probably an accomplishment of like, oh, this is beautiful thing that I helped, a boy that I helped rebuild, bring him back and make him better. And you have Jack being like, no, she can't fire you for that. Which then, you see Jane kind of happy because she's like, it just shows you just how caring Jack is. It's like, even with your new body, you thought that you didn't have a heart. It's like, nope, the way that you're acting right now kind of proves that. Well, she talks to Ev, and Ev basically, like I said, Ev is very messed up in the way she views things and how she thinks of things. Because she's like, the reason why she fired Jane is because it's like Jane said no. It's like no one says no to me, but Jack's like, that's not how the world works. We're not all here to do everything that you want to do. Even if you are the queen and everything, it doesn't work like that. You have to be reasonable and understanding, like her reasonings behind it. It's like all she's ever done is devoted herself to you and everything. It's kind of like, but for her, it's kind of like, the only way she can make someone love her is by owning them or controlling them. It's like, for example, she takes Jack. She's like, if I didn't control you, which she kind of sets him free just to prove a point. It's like, now that I no longer own you, will you actually stay or will you abandon me like everyone else? Which I was pretty sure Jack would stay, but it's like, because obviously he much like Rowan has a conflicted heart. Even though Tip killed him, he says like, oh, she's just a friend. But even then, it's kind of a situation where he's like, well, actually, I don't know where we stand. It's like she tried to kill me, but she's been my best friend for such a long time, and now I have these weird feelings for her. After everything, and now it's like Landelier's there, and it's like his feelings for her. It's a lot to handle. I mean, because so much has happened to him. Obviously, being brought back from the dead with the new body he's got, being sold off to someone who, he, like I said, he sees the good side of her that maybe she's not quite ready to see herself. I'm still very curious. I still want to know an answer to why she wears all those masks. It's not like they all cover, even the mask she was wearing in this episode showed most of her face, obviously. So it's not like all her face is covered up at any point in time. It's only like, what, I'd say maybe 30% typically. Some masks more than others, but in this particular mask, you can see you can make out the majority of her face. It's like, I still want to know why you decided to wear the mask, but she lets Jack go. But like, I was really sure Jack was going to stay, but turns out he didn't. And as he's walking away, the wizard shows up and he's like, oh yeah, I want my weapons. And they're like, yeah, we got them ready. And they all point them at the wizard, which once again, I should have seen coming, because it's like, even the wizard's like, well, great. What the hell is this? Which makes sense, because she's probably still pissed about the fact is that her dad died in his kingdom and everything. So it's, well, not even just, it's that, but on top of that, it's also the fact is that the wizard didn't help when the Beast Forever came and attacked her kingdom and she lost her mom. So basically he said when the time comes, she's going to sit there and watch Emerald City fall. So what she's probably going to do is shoo the wizard away. And I was like, you know what's going to happen is you are going to go back there and have to fight this war without these guns. I will keep them. And when it's all said and done, what she'll probably do is invade the winner. If the witches win, use the guns against the witches. If the wizard somehow manages to win, go after him. So it's just kind of like, we'll wait and see who the loser is, and then we will take them down, essentially. That's kind of like, I feel like would be like I don't know what the right word would be, because part of my head is like the totalitarian or dictator way to handle that situation. I mean, more so than anything, we've kind of seen that the one who is actually, in fact, a dictator is the wizard himself. Like I said, it's just a very interesting twist on his character. It's like, from the beginning, I was like, oh, he's kind of a douchebag. And it's like, as the episode's going, it's like, man, he's a mega douchebag. But like I said, at the end of it, it's like hard to say who's a hero in this. It's like, are there any really good people? I mean, really the only good person throughout this all is Dorothy. Obviously, she's conflicted. She was trying to kill Glinda, but it's like, would it, I mean, if they're, I mean, it's hard to say, is there a happy solution? Like, because at the end of this, whose side would they choose? Would they be on their own side? Would they choose a side? Because, like, because for her main reason for being with the wizard is because the wizard Dorothy knows that the wizard knows her family. Obviously, he told her lies and everything, but she didn't know that the dark side of the wizard, like everyone else has kind of come to know him. And she's kind of new to the land. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff that the wizard kind of keeps to himself that he doesn't let even, regular citizens know. So it's definitely going to be interesting going forward. Like I said, Rowan after her trying to kill her. It makes you wonder, will Sophie kind of influence that at all? Like, what is going to happen to her? I mean, what will happen if Glinda does push her too far? That might push Rowan and Dorothy to come after you again. So, very good episode. I'm just very interested to see where everything goes from here. At what point in time what form is the Beast Forever going to take? Obviously, it's, Anna brought up the fact that it's supposed to take on a form of, like, what will be probably the ultimate irony is that it takes on the form of Dorothy's dad. Like, basically it comes back in the form of him, and then Dorothy has to confront her dad, but the wizard also has to confront the man that he got killed he killed. Obviously it was accidental, but out of his jealousy, but then lying about the fact is that he because he kept that from everyone, that was his fault that all this happened, that it ended up in Oz and everything. So I mean, because it's supposed to take on the form of someone that the wizard knows, someone that he kind of has a weakness to. And I'm like, if it isn't Dorothy's mom, which I don't think it is, I feel like his dad would be the best option. We never actually did find out whatever happened to the other lady that was here too. The one that's, because there was a second lady. I forgot her name. What's her name Jane? That's not the same lady, is it? I'm sitting here thinking I can't remember her name. I feel like her name was Jane. Isn't that the same lady that's working in the kingdom? Is it? Am I just realizing that? I was like, no, I could have sworn she had like different colored hair. I mean, granted, enough time has passed, but it's like we still haven't heard hiding her hair of like what actually happened to her. So maybe that's actually her. Maybe, because I can't remember her name now. The lady that worked with Karen and Frank. I don't remember her name now. I get the feeling like it might have been Jane. Do let me know in the comments down below. Am I just being stupid? Am I right about that? And I'm stupid because I'm just realizing that, or am I stupid because that's not the same person? Do let me know. I have to look that up because that's going to bother the crap out of me because I'm just putting that together. Because we never did find out what exactly happened to her. But if that is the same person, how did she start working for the kingdom? I mean, not unless it's a situation, because Frank obviously always had a big issue with her, especially because she was the one like, oh, let's get back home, and he didn't want to get back home. But then he still sent Karen back home. So I guess it's a situation where it's like, okay, you leave here, it's fine. I mean, because then why would Karen be the one to go but not Jane? I don't know. Like, very, very confusing question. If that's, I don't know, my brain's a little racked right now. Like I said, good episode. I'm definitely very interested to find out what new developments we face next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.